Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another brand new episode of Dravidian Does History. I'm joined here once again by my dear friend Alan. How are you today, Alan?
I am doing good. How are you?
I'm great. As you can see, I haven't showered or anything. I'm just a big mass of hair today.
Oh, it looks gorgeous. The hair is amazing. And I love the pin that you have on.
Oh, the pin is the friend's pin.
Yes, the window.
Well, how have you been today?
Been good, been a little busy with work and everything that's going on in life. But I'm excited to do this with you. Like we discussed in the last episode, this episode, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into your book, which I'm excited about.
Yes.
So,
So, as we discussed last time, today we are starting a new series, technically, because we are going to be discussing the history of India through the perspective of my new book, The Lords of India, Imperial Identity from Ajatashatru to Alamgir, Volume 1, The Indosphere. I know it's a long name, but the original plan was to do up until the 18th century, but the story grew in the telling, so I split it into two where it rationally makes sense. So
mm,
today, because we're starting the journey of discussing Indian history, I thought we could talk about the idea of India itself. What do you think?
I I have a lot of thoughts about the current if like what is going on with India as a nation or a state like right now.
Mhm.
And I want to know more about how it came to be and what it was before, because a lot of truth is being twisted and turned and broken and hidden while new narratives are being brought forth.
Exactly. So I think the whole idea of India, again, people don't seem to be able to wrap their heads around what India means, because a lot of the time people think of India as it is today and then extrapolate that to what India was in the past, right? So, for example, when we think of India today, we, as Indians, passport holders of the nation of India, think about the Republic of India, which came into existence in the 1950s. Even though we got independence from the British in 1947, it took a little bit longer for the Republic to be declared. And that's how we have the Independence Day on August 15th, as well as the Republic Day on January 26th, right? And again, as Malayalis, we have a different experience because our state of Kerala didn't come into existence until the 1956. So we didn't
Hmm.
join the union until 1956. So our idea of India is slightly different from others in that regard itself. And if you think about states like Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand or Uttarakhand or Telangana, again, the story is different because those states, as in entities within the Republic of India, have only existed in the last 30 years. In the case of Telangana, maybe much less than that, right? So again, we have to reorient ourselves in the understanding of India and ourselves within the state of India to understand what India is and what India was. Um, a lot of the conversations that we have these days regards with the nomenclature, right? What should we call India? India, that is Bharat, is what is mentioned in our constitution itself. So it already gives two names. Are both of these names equally valid? Which one has more validity, if any of them does, right? Why do we call India India? And what is Bharat? And are there other names for this idea that is India? So these are a lot of the topics that I would like to discuss within the short time that we have before we embark on the journey that is India's history through my book. Um,
Yes.
I know it's a daunting task, and I know it's kind of a challenging idea to wrap your heads around. So let's break down things into timelines, for an example. The Republic of India, the modern nation state of the Republic of India, it has existed for roughly 78 years now, right? 1947 to 2025, it's roughly 78 years. Um, that's the average rough lifespan of an Indian person. So basically, during the lifetimes of most of our grandparents, India as a nation didn't exist. What existed before it was British India. or the British colony of India, which is a different entity entirely from the Republic of India, because the British entity that was colonial India consisted of parts of what is today Pakistan and Bangladesh and parts of Afghanistan, right? But it did not include any of the independent princely states. They were nominally related to the British Indian government, but they were considered as independent sovereign states, which is what India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh and Nepal are today. They are independent, individual, sovereign states. They exist as themselves. For example, if you want to cross into Bangladesh, you need a passport. Or if you need to cross into Pakistan, that's a different legal system, it's a different government. Similarly, if you went from the Kingdom of Travancore to Chennai, that's a different country technically, because it's a different
Mm,
government at the center. It's a different governing body, right?
mm,
So, and that's why when India got independence, the whole idea of forming the nation of India was stitched together with different independent states. And states, by what I mean is states as sovereign states, not states like federal states like Kerala or Tamil Nadu, any of those smaller units. I'm talking about independent sovereign states coming together and sometimes being coerced into joining the Union of India. So, for example, Junagadh what was an independent country technically, and it had to be invaded and brought in as the Indian state of Gujarat. Similarly, Kashmir, even though it's a big issue now, it was an independent kingdom that got invaded by both India and Pakistan and is still kind of being argued over, even though it is technically a part of India, most of it. This also
mm.
applies to Hyderabad, which was an independent kingdom that was invaded, even though people call it a military action. It was an invasion that resulted in becoming part of India. And Travancore was basically coerced into joining the nation of India because it's a teeny tiny state the size roughly of England at the bottom of this huge landmass. So it can't exist independently. But if you go historically, most of these places always existed independent of what would be considered India in a way, as a state. So we have to think of India as two different things at the same time. It is at once a sovereign state, which is the state of India or the Republic of India, which is today, but also as a geographical and cultural idea, which encompasses what is today Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, parts of Myanmar, Bangladesh, the country of India, as well as parts of Sri Lanka. All of this encompasses what is culturally India, historically India. And this is not a political identity or a political ideology, which is what Akhand Bharat is, which is another idea pushed by certain sections where they think all of this should be politically one unit, which never has any feasibility, which was never a reality. It was a cultural unit, just the same way as Europe is today, right? The European Union is basically a collection of different independent sovereign states coming together for economic and military protections and safeties and interdependences. India could have existed in the same way historically, and it could have existed that way in the modern times as a collection of different independent states as well. But because of the colonial experience, our reality happened to be slightly different. Uh, does that make any kind of sense?
That does. When you started talking about how it is a cultural identity of, all of these today's different countries becoming one under India, my instant thought was like it is not a political identity, but more of an ideology or a feeling of sorts, or you know,
Yeah.
what I compared it to was the continents like Asia, Europe, and that's
Yeah.
how I thought about it first. But I think the when you mentioned how the colonial experience changed things, that gave me more clarity on how we are very similar. Like today's country of India and the countries Pakistan, Bangladesh, even Afghanistan to a point, has so many similarities in terms of food, language, clothes we wear. Like there is so many undertones. It has developed into more unique styles and it has differences right now, but you can always see
A
the
common thread.
undercurrents of a commonality. Yes, that is still very much present, and that existence, I believe, is what you are talking about.
Yeah, because historically, when you look at South Asia, the subcontinent, I
Mhm.
don't want to use the word Indian subcontinent because that kind of minimizes it and it puts the political identity of India at the center. But when I say South Asia, it considers all of these geographical and cultural identities, right? South Asia has always existed in a cultural continuum from what is today Iran all the way up to what is today Southeast Asia, this cultural continuum always exchanged and shared common ideas, religions, art forms, and we can still see its echoes today. Even linguistically,
Mm,
like most of the North Indian languages are in the Indo-European family, and most of the South Indian languages, all of the South Indian languages to be exact, are Dravidian languages, which have no direct relationship with any of the other languages in the world, right? But still, we are part of India because of that shared cultural identity and that shared cultural history. If you think about it in a political way, an identical way, none of the empires that have existed in India, for example, have managed to capture all of what is today India or South Asia. Only twice did it really come close to it. First, it was under the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka, where about 75% of what is South Asia came under um, direct or indirect rule. It's not entirely clear how much direct rule and how much direct governance was possible during the Mauryan era. It's so long ago. We know that up until Karnataka, his edicts were present, but if direct influence was there, we don't know. And then, secondly, under the reign of Alamgir or Aurangzeb and the Mughals, we know direct control was possible up until what is today Tamil Nadu, that area. But again, what is today Tamil Nadu and Kerala were never part of any North Indian empire or state. But culturally, we were always linked. So we always had this idea. And that goes back to when states first formed in India as well. So that's where the nomenclature comes in. So, for example, when we find references to India in ancient writings of the ancient Greeks or the Romans or the Persians or the Chinese, they use different versions of the name India for the same landmass and cultural identity, but they don't mean it in any way as a state, the way we mean the name India today. So when the Greeks refer to India, they are referring to the people and communities that live beyond the Indus River or the Sindhu River. They couldn't say Sindhu, so it became Indus, and thus the name India. Same with Persian cultures. They couldn't say Sindhu, so all of the people who were lived beyond the Indus River, they became Hindu, and thus came the name Hindustan or the land of the Hindus. And again, it's not a cultural or religious identity. It's a name for the group of peoples, the group of cultures, the group of communities, and the group of civilizations and states that existed in this general landmass beyond the Indus. And its meanings and its understandings changed according to time and according to what state was talking about. For example, when the ancient Grecians were talking about, or Grecians, ancient Greeks were talking about India, they specifically meant people in the uh, land masses they were in contact with. For example, when they talk about Indians, they're talking about Malayalis, for example, because we know from archaeological evidence as well as literary evidence that ancient Greece and ancient Egypt had contacts with the coastal cities that dot what is today Kerala, what is today Karnataka, what is today Maharashtra, and Gujarat. So we have found archaeological
Oh,
evidence. Romans, the primary trading partner of the Romans was not China, it was India. So, for example, you are from Kochi, right? So
yes.
there is a place in Kochi called Pattanam, which has been identified as the site for what was the ancient Roman city mentioned in Roman documents as Muziris or Muchiripatnam. So it's an ancient
Wow.
city port which exported valuable goods like cotton and spices to the Romans, who bought it for exorbitant prices. You can find more details about this in books like, um, again, The Golden Road by William Dalrymple, for example. It's the most recent example I can give because it goes into more detail about it. So their idea of what is India, again, is informed by what people they come in contact with beyond the Indus. But their vague idea of India also included probably Southeast Asia, because to them it's all the same cultural continuum. And in the Middle Ages, 12th, 13th centuries, when first Arabic and Islamic and Persian cultures come into contact with Indian states, they specifically mention that Indians are a group of independent states. They specifically say, for example, in one of the texts that I have read, and I'll mention in the details for the video in the description, that India and China both have a lot of states, and India has far more states and kings than China. But there is still a Balhara who is the most magnificent of all these kings. And the Balhara is their version of the word Vallabha, which they're referring to the Rashtrakuta Vallabha, who was ruling from Manyakheta, which is today in Malkhed in Maharashtra. Right? So their idea of India as a idea is again a collection of states. But we, when we look back and study history, for some reason, Indians in particular, when we look back, when they mention India, we think of the state, the Republic of India, because our understanding of what India is based on our lived experience as Indians. But if you go 300 years ago, what they wouldn't have called themselves Indians in the way that we call ourselves Indians. If you were somebody who was in Kerala 300 years ago, you wouldn't even be calling yourself Travancorean for most of your existence, because Travancore didn't come into existence until the 1800s, right? So you could have been somebody from a particular location. Your identity was based on your regional identities and your specific religious identities. You could have been a Shaivite, you could have been a Vaishnavite, you could have been a Buddhist, but you wouldn't have considered yourself Indian in the way that we consider ourselves Indian. Like 300 years ago, somebody from Delhi would not have called himself an Indian. He would have most probably called himself a Hindustani, because he was in the country of Hindustan. And Hindustan as an identity, again, is a Persianate idea that specifically speaks of a state or a political identity that stretches from what is today Indus to up until about Bengal. Because beyond that, again, they thought of it as Bengal. That was a different cultural identity. So you see this in the political writings of the period, where whoever is controlling Delhi or Kannauj or Agra, the central cities in Hindustan at the time, they deliberately go and seize territories in different states like Bengal or like um, Gujarat or Kashmir or even Afghanistan. Even though Afghanistan wasn't the term they used, they would call it Kandahar or Persia or whatever it is. And the Deccan, it was considered a different entity. And of course, Carnatic, deep down south, was again an entirely different entity to them. It was not considered India or Hindustan as a state, right? To put things in another different perspective, timeline wise, 78 years of the country of India. That's less than one of the Delhi sultanates. For example, the first Delhi dynasty to rule in Delhi was the Shamsi dynasty, named after Shamsuddin Iltutmish, who was the first real sultan of Hindustan, who formed the first real state of Islamic Persianate power in the Indian subcontinent in 1206. He gained the throne at the time, but he really he was a subordinate to Qutbuddin Aibak at the time, but he became a sultan in 1210, and then his dynasty ruled till 1290. That's exactly almost 80 years, right? One dynasty. So if you were somebody who lived in Delhi or Agra at the time, you would have considered yourself part of Hindustan of the Shamsi dynasty. Your allegiance would have been to them. Your identity would have been based on them. And anybody from somewhere else, from Gujarat or Bengal or Malwa or any of these places that were not directly controlled by the Sultan of Delhi, would have been an alien state. So when we think about the Delhi Sultans invading all these places, similarly, if another state, if Bengal whoever was the king at the time there, I think it was the Khaljis, if they invaded Delhi, that was considered an invasion of Hindustan, right? So that's a different entire concept. But think about it this way, people who lived in the 17th century, for example, if you are in most of India, you have already been ruled by one single family for about 200 years now. So that's your parents and their parents and their parents have lived under the aegis of this one family. So your identity to your state, your allegiance to your state is entirely different than even what we can conceive of what is today India, because the Mughals have been in power from 1526. And by 1707, when Alamgir dies, that family has been ruling for almost exactly 150 years. And they have been doing a spectacular job at it. Shifting to the south, the Cholas, I have a sheet here which I need to cheat off of because, again, dates, right? The Vijayanagara
I
Empire, for
was
example.
I was actually going to ask you, how do you remember these dates so much? Because there are so many. I
Exactly.
can never do that.
I've never was never really good at dates, but I only started remembering dates once I started writing the book. It's kind of helping me remember things better, right? For example, a lot of these empires, the Delhi Sultanate lasted for roughly 300 years, the Vijayanagara Empire 230 years, Travancore as a state lasted for 220 years. These are all much longer lasting states than what is India today, and already we can see forces from within are correcting what can be termed as an oddity, which is this whole landmass unified as one state, ruled from far away Delhi. To put things into a different perspective, my hometown is as far away from Delhi as Mexico is from Toronto, right? Already you can see how perceptions are different because we are one country. We assume that we are all connected, but somebody in Peshawar, somebody in Dhaka, somebody in Isfahan, they have more closer ties to somebody in Delhi than somebody in Delhi has to somebody in Todupuzha. Because linguistically they are closer, they speak similar languages, Persian, Urdu, Hindi, related languages even from ancestral times, because Persian and Sanskrit are closer than the Dravidian languages are to Sanskrit, technically, because of their
I
roots, right?
I have a thought in connection with when you said when your connection to the person, to someone who is in Delhi, is less stronger or less
In
intense.
that one perspective,
Yeah, in that perspective. In another way, I would phrase it as my or someone in Kerala's their identity to the nation of India or the Republic of India is very different, would be quite different from someone's experience in Gujarat.
yeah,
Like how they
definitely.
view themselves as an Indian or their relationship to the Republic of India, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because historically, what would be considered India has always manifested itself in even in cultural terms, mostly what is above the Deccan. We have always been kind of an afterthought in the idea of India because, for example, Bharat, the term applied to the people who were associated with the Bharata tribe and the Vedic rituals and all of that, right? The Indo-Aryan language speakers. That was an exclusively North Indian identity for nigh on 1,000 years. And it only spread to the rest of India after that, after the Mauryans started expanding. And then all of these cultural ideas started to seep into the Deccan from around the 5th century CE, and then towards South India with the coming of the Brahmins from afterwards. That's why the form of Hinduism practiced down south is different from North India, right? So when you think about it, somebody who's born and brought up in Gujarat or Delhi or even Bengal, they have almost always been part of the same shared state for most of India's history, South Asia's history. Regardless, every time there has been a major empire, most of these places, what is stretching from Indus to the Brahmaputra Delta, has almost always been part of one state. but the rest of India has almost always been a different state or a set of different states, which is why my book is the way that it is, because it discusses the larger states, because it is trying to deconstruct this idea of what is India and tell the stories of the different peoples that existed concurrently and telling all of their stories through the viewpoint of the largest state, because it wasn't always uh, centered on North India and wasn't always sometimes centered within what is today South Asia itself. Right? And how did these ideas come? And how did India become what it is? And how all of these states and all of these rulers who ruled these states influenced what we understand as India today is the point of the Lords of India. That's why I titled it Lords of India, not gods, not kings, because both of these streams come together to form the gigantic river that is India. It's rich, it's multifaceted, it's extremely complicated, but there's always a way to navigate this stream and learn these stories if we have a good viewpoint. And my viewpoint is to understand the different states that existed within what is India. And then from how the relationships between different states that operated within India influenced each other and influenced the story of India as it is. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. I have a question though.
Yeah.
The different states that existed within the nation, today's nation of India, which together was called India back then, were they always in conflict? Were some of them in conflict, some of them were not, some of them have may have been long-term allies. So do you explore this like the different relationships between different states in your book? Or is that something that you would be writing soon?
To find the answer to that, you will have to check in the next episode of Dravidinda's history because I have to keep you hooked. How about that?
That does make sense. So I asked a right question there.
Yes,
I'm glad.
exactly.
Okay.
So I'll see you next time. Dravidinda's history will be back, continuing the conversation about the lords of India. See you next time.
And I'll be here asking all the silly and the stupid questions.
Excellent. That's what I have you here for. Take care, everyone.
Bye.